Hey, good afternoon from Jakarta to all the speakers and participants around the globe who have joined our webinar. I'm Shaharani, the head of Climate and Decarbonization at Indonesian Center for Environmental Law, and I'll be moderating today's session. We will begin this webinar shortly, but before, I would like to walk all of you through our housekeeping rules. Mas Yan boleh. So we would like to request all participants to update their display name with name and affiliation for easy identification during the Q&A session. And then each panelist will present for 15 minutes, and then it will be followed by a question and answer session. And the participants can ask questions live by clicking the raise hand feature on the Zoom. And then the moderator will be checking whether there are participants who want to ask question live. Or you can also ask the question through the Q&A column in the Zoom menu below. At the end of the webinar, the committee will share a Google form for participants to confirm attendance and provide feedback on the webinar. At the end of the form, you will get access to shareable slides from the panelists once you have done filling the form. All right, so today's webinar aims to commemorate and reflect on the significant milestone in the global climate journey. We acknowledge that a decade has passed since the adoption of the Paris Agreement, in which many countries around the world pledged to keep the temperature rise under 1.5 degrees and achieve climate resilience. Over these 10 years, the Paris Agreement has shaped national policies, mobilized climate finance, and fostered an unprecedented sense of shared responsibility among nations towards tackling climate crisis. However, we see that the path has been far from straightforward, and with the global context and how it has shifted dramatically in the recent years, marked by geopolitical tensions, trade disruptions, energy security dilemmas, as well as growing economic inequalities that continue to challenge the pace and scale of climate action around the world. Countries in Global South particularly face the complexities in a more acute way, as they also navigate the need for economic growth while confronting the realities of climate impacts that has been escalated daily. Today's session is hoped to provide an opportunity for us to reflect critically on the lessons of the last 10 years on the implementation of Paris Agreement and explore how particularly civil society can contribute in keeping the climate collaboration alive as the world looks ahead to the COP30 in Brazil. We are joined by 4 amazing speakers today. So the first is Mariana Lirio. She is a policy advisor at Climate Observatory Brazil, joining us from Paris. And then we have Denise Marie Lukban, a climate policy analyst at Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities, ICSC. And then we have Bella Natania as the Deputy Director of Program at ICEL. And last but not least, we have Giovanni Maurice Pradipta, an Indonesian working as policy advisor at Germanwatch. Without further ado, let's start the discussion from Brazil, who will be hosting this year's climate negotiation in November. So I would like to pass the mic to Mariana to share about Brazil's recent NDC updates and its vision to COP30 and how the current geopolitics landscape might affect the expectation during the upcoming COP30 in November.
Thank you, Rani. Hello, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be part of this conversation. Thank you to ICEL for organizing this. Rani, will you be able to share my slides? Do you want
Yes.
me to? Perfect. Thank you very much. So as Rani was saying, my name is Mariana Lirio. I'm speaking today on behalf of Observatório do Clima, the Brazilian Climate Observatory. Just to briefly introduce it, it's a network of over 130 civil society organizations that work in the socio-environmental and climate agenda. And today I will share an overview of Brazil's updated NDC. I will talk a little bit about its limitations, its barriers, and how we see the road ahead now to COP30, especially in this very sensitive, changing geopolitical climate. So first off, to start, I'm going to talk about the current context of Brazil's NDC. Could you please pass, Ronnie? Perfect. To introduce the NDC, the targets that we have now are to reduce emissions by 48% by 2025, by 53% by 2030, and between 59 and 67% by 2035. All of this relative to 2005 levels. And along with the UAE and Azerbaijan, Brazil forms a troika to implement what they call Mission 1.5. So the intention is to lobby other countries towards increased ambitions in their NDCs. So that is why the UAE was the first to submit the NDC, and then Brazil. Brazil was the second country to submit an updated NDC. And Brazil, for this, deserves credit for submitting its NDC early. This shows political will, and this also shows commitment to this multilateral process, especially in this moment of geopolitical changing climate. So to start off, we're going to talk a little bit about the progresses of this updated NDC. If you could please pass the slide. Thank you, Rennie. So for the first time, this NDC outlines real economy measures, especially regarding deforestation and adaptation. So this breaks away from a pattern of abstract, unenforced targets. So this NDC improves on adaptation specifically. It describes national plan strategies, objectives, sectoral guidelines. This is a very critical issue for Brazil's vulnerable population. So this is a very important point that we highlight. And also an interesting thing is regarding deforestation. So deforestation since the start of the Lula government has decreased. This is mainly due to the strengthening of environmental agencies. So IBAMA, our main environmental institute, has been reinforced. And also due to the resumption of the environmental control plan, the environmental deforestation control plan, which we call PPCDA. PPCDA is known as a very important plan in reducing 80% of deforestation in a decade at the first Lula government. So it's very important. And now what the Brazilian government did is that it updated also, it created this plan for the other biomes in Brazil. So for the Cerrado, the Pantanal, all of the other biomes that have been increasing deforestation. So this is a very important thing, and it's something that we need to highlight in the NDC. The highlight on deforestation is very important. But we also need to talk about the limitations of Brazil's NDC. So one of the key issues is that there is no universally agreed benchmark for what a 1.5 aligned NDC looks like. So this creates a lot of room for countries to interpret their own targets as sufficient, even when sometimes they are not. So what we did at the OC, at the Brazilian Climate Observatory, is that we did an analysis of the NDC based on two benchmarks. So one is the Climate Equity Reference Framework, and also on the IPCC's benchmark. And what we saw in both of these benchmarks is that Brazil's NDC is not compatible with the 1.5 pathway. And one of the main issues is regarding what we call the bandwidth. So Brazil's 2035 target, NDC target, is presented not as one figure, but as a range. So the 67% to 95% emissions cut from 2005 levels, this bandwidth is unusually large. So it reflects very distinct political scenarios, and it complicates both the evaluation and also the implementation of the NDC, because both of these targets, they have very different mitigation efforts for each. So a set of policies will vary according to the chosen target. And the set of policies will reflect important topics such as deforestation, for example. So one of the things in this NDC is that it still allows for levels of deforestation, legal deforestation by compensation, which I'm going to talk about in the next slide. And also a very important limitation that we highlight is that it has no clear pathway to phase out fossil fuels. We have an analysis of this, if anybody is interested, a more complete analysis of this in our website regarding the main limitations and some of the progresses on the NDC. And now we're going to talk about what could be better. So what could we change in this NDC for it to be better? First off, the least ambitious target must be dropped. So the lower ambition, the 1.05 gigaton, needs to be dropped. First of all, this is one of the important themes of it. Also, regarding, as I was saying, deforestation. So Brazil made a pledge to end deforestation by 2030. This pledge was made by Lula. It was made in one of his first speeches at COP, and the Brazilian government confirmed it later. This is very important. But the thing is zero deforestation commitment by 2030 really zero? Since the NDC allows for deforestation as long as it is compensated. So what it calls compensated is, for example, with reforestation or recovery of other areas. This NDC risks enabling significant emissions from land use well into the 2030s. And why is this such a problem for Brazil? Because the emission shares in Brazil are different from the rest of the world. While most of the world's emissions are due to the energy sector, due to fossil fuels, the emissions in Brazil are mainly due to land use. So 50%, at least in 2023, the land use was responsible for 50% of its emissions. So you can say that deforestation specifically was responsible for half of the emission that Brazil emits. So that is why the NDC needs to include all types of deforestation, legal and illegal. And what are some of the national issues that are related to these topics? So first of all, we have a very hostile Congress at the moment. The hostile Congress is advancing anti-environmental legislation. And we have in the Brazilian Climate Observatory something that we call the destruction package, which is a document that highlights 30 of the most regressive bills that are being discussed today in Congress. And most of them are related to deforestation and to the flexibilization of the forest code. And what is very shocking is that the rural caucus, the agriculture caucus, the agriculture front, is very organized, and they are unmoved by COP30 happening in Brazil. So this is not stopping them from advancing this bad legislation. Another thing that we have as a national barrier in Brazil at the moment is political ambiguity regarding fossil fuels. So we see this very much in the debates regarding the oil drilling in the mouth of the Amazon. So President Lula is keen on exploring this region, despite a technical report that was done by IBAMA, our environmental agency, that went against this. So this debate has become very political. Lula is pressuring the president of IBAMA of doing this oil exploration despite of this technical report. And this goes very much against Lula's ambition of being this sort of climate leader who speaks in his speeches about climate being one of the central points. So this is going as a big contradiction. And we also see this contradiction in the BR-319 discussion. BR-319 is a highway that would cut right through the Amazon. And Lula has also said that he wants to pave this highway. And the problem is that these highways, they are very linked to deforestation. So near where the highways are built, this highway would be built, it would lead to immense deforestation. And this would go against Brazil's pledge of going deforestation zero by 2030. So next slide, please. So digging more into what we expect for COP30 in this new geopolitical climate. So now the Brazilian government has the presidency of COP30, and Brazil has a historic opportunity to restore trust in multilateralism and to center the voices of the global South. The presidency is led by André Correia do Lago. André Correia do Lago is a seasoned diplomat, seasoned negotiator. He is a big expert in the topic, and he has already sent now a letter, his first letter as COP30 president, to all of the parties, which sets an inspiring tone. He calls for what we call a mutirão in Portuguese, which is a collective effort to reaffirm the urgency of the climate crisis, of the importance of multilateralism. And another issue that we see in another point that we see in the letter is that it proposes a Baku to Belém roadmap. So to mobilize the 1.3 trillion annually by 2035, which emphasizes forests, cities, technologies, and innovation. And the one point that we see in this letter that we think that is missing is that it fails to address the phase out of fossil fuels. So that is a central point that we see that is missing. And we also did an analysis on this letter if anybody is interested in, and you can find it in our website. So what do we expect now for COP30? So the NDCs aren't a formal negotiating item, but COP30 will be key political moment for countries to commit to stronger targets than before. And we know that the Brazilian government will likely work on this and is likely working on this at this present moment. Also, the implementation, the Brazilian government has said that this will be a very big implementation COP. So we expect it on certain topics, for example, forests, especially in Brazil, especially since COP is going to be held in Belém in the Amazon. We expect that forest will be a very big issue. We expect that there will be the launch of TFFF, the Tropical Forest Finance Facility. This is something that the Brazilian government is very keen on launching. We will also expect big debates regarding adaptation, just transition, and also finance. So this, for Brazil, is very important, especially speaking in favor of least developed countries and developing countries. So Brazil can and should use this role to push G20 countries and also other emerging economies towards bigger ambitions. But what are some of the issues now, talking specifically about this new geopolitical climate? The last slide that I have. So we see a leadership vacuum. So the global climate leadership is in crisis. We have the US, which is paralyzed. We don't know if they will go to COP. If they do, we could be a little bit afraid of what could be discussed there with the new government. The EU is also fragmented. Regarding the US specifically, this whole dynamic on tariffs, for example, could this have an impact also, for example, on deforestation in Brazil? So could we expect, for example, this to lead to more commodities exported to China? So that could lead to deforestation. So these are some things that we should be very observant of. But specifically regarding COP30 and how this leadership and changing this leadership vacuum and how this changing geopolitical climate is happening, is that no country at the moment is currently championing for the phase out of fossil fuels, despite this being essential for us staying within the 1.5 degrees. So it's important that civil society pushes this agenda. So this COP is going to be different. It's going to be focused on inclusivity, on transparency, which is different from the last two COPs, for example. So it is a big opportunity, a big space for civil society to have a voice, to come together, to push this agenda forward regarding fossil fuels, also to push the agenda against deforestation, and also in favor of financing, especially civil societies from the global south. So it's going to be very interesting to see how these discussions are going to turn out in this specific geopolitical climate. So I'm also very interested in seeing how you all are seeing the climate discussions in this climate. So I think this is it. I think I don't have much time either. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Morena, for the very thorough insight on what's happening in Brazil and expectations for the upcoming COP, especially with the current dynamics globally. I think you raise a very critical points of first, in a national context, I think it also applies to probably most of the global south countries where in broader framework, the climate ambition is lacking in terms of like the integration between, for example, like the target on the NDC with other several fragmented regulations and policies being in place. And then the second one is also the need for a universal benchmark to track the 1.5 aligned NDCs. I hope this is also progress that can be fit on the multilateral process happening in under UNFCCC. And lastly, expectations of COP30 being a more inclusive and transparent COP compared to the previous two COPs in the line of Troika. So we'll move next to Dennis or Z to share about the updates from the Philippines. So I will pass the mic to you.
Hopefully I'm audible enough for everyone. So hi everyone, I'm Denise Lopano. You can just call me Z. I'm from I'm Climate Institute. I'm climate policy analyst from Institute for Climate and Sustainable City. So mainly I'll be speaking about the context for the Philippines of its NDC alignment with the Paris Agreement, what are the opportunities and barriers, and of course global engagement on the side of a CSO perspective. So of course, next slide, please. So of course, the Philippines Nationally Determined Contribution, or NDC, as we all know, was already submitted on the year 2021, which represents the country's official commitment to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. So the document sets to reduce GHG emissions by 75% from 2020 to 2030. So this is relative to a projected business as usual scenario of 3,340 megatons of carbon dioxide. However, a closer look reveals that only 2.71% of this commitment is unconditional, with the remaining 72.29% dependent on international support in the form of finance, technology transfer, and capacity building. So this very much highlights a critical gap between ambition and feasibility. So while the headline reduction figure appears pretty bold, the heavy reliance on external assistance suggests that the Philippines NDC is not yet fully aligned with the Paris Agreement's 1.5 degrees Celsius pathway. So which this demands a deep, fast, fair emission cuts from across all sectors and clear long-term strategies. So to strengthen this alignment, the Philippines need to scale up its unconditional targets, develops more sector-specific decarbonization roadmaps, particularly in high-emitting sectors like energy, transport, and agriculture, and of course, ensure that these are supported by robust implementation frameworks. And lastly, a transparent and well-functioning monitoring and reporting, or and and verification, or MRV system, is also very crucial to track the progress and build trust both domestically and internationally. So unfortunately, there are several key barriers that stand in the way of this transition, particularly in the Philippines. So this include number one, limited financial and technical capability to implement low carbon development plans. Secondly, gaps in governance and institutional coordination, particularly across national and local levels. Thirdly, dependence on fossil fuels and outdated energy mix, with coal and imported gas still playing major roles in the energy mix, particularly in the Philippines. And of course, we have the socioeconomic challenges, particularly poverty, disaster recovery needs, and developmental priorities that make rapid decarbonization more complex and politically sensitive. So, in this key aspect, like how is like the current geopolitical dynamic now affecting like the country's climate action? Next slide, please. Maybe I wasn't able to. Okay, never mind. So I'll just discuss it briefly. So several key aspects of the current geopolitical dynamics that is affecting the Philippines climate action is if global and regional environmental governance continues to weaken due to geopolitical tensions, the Philippines face challenges in accessing support, mainly because we are heavily reliant on international support um, that that can hinder implementing internationally agreed upon climate targets. The Philippines' economic geography, for one, also puts it in the spotlight of changing economics, including trade, supply chain and shipping routes, and climate change impacts such as extreme weather events and sea level rise can disrupt, of course, our economic activities. Conversely, shifts in global supply chains driven by climate concerns or geopolitical factors also presents both opportunities and challenges for the Philippines transition to a more greener economy. So the need to future-proof the economy in the face of these changes suggests that climate action will need to be integrated with more economic development strategies. Also, several emerging trends beyond great power rivalry that will likely impact the Philippines, including the socio-ecological transformation of megacities like Manila and Cebu. So climate change is a key driver of this transformation. So this necessitates urban adaptation and mitigation measures. And geopolitical considerations could influence the prioritization and implementation of such measures, especially concerning resource allocation and international partnerships for sustainable urban development. So in summary, the current geopolitical dynamics create a complex backdrop for the Philippines' climate action. While the urgency of climate change is recognized, the country's strategic position in the competitive geopolitical landscape will likely shape its approach to addressing this challenge, influencing its partnership, available resources, and policy priorities. So the need to navigate great power competition while also simultaneously addressing the impacts of climate change could be particularly challenging while also requiring a balance and a strategic approach. So looking ahead to COP3. So as mentioned, of course, at this approach as it approaches to be hosted in Brazil, the spotlight also once again turns to like how developing countries, especially like, from the global south, can further strengthen their climate commitments in both that are ambitious and equitable. So in the case of the Philippines and other similarly situated countries, COP30 offers a vital opportunity to one, advocate for a scaled up climate finance, especially for adaptation and for delivering on the conditional components of their NDCs. Secondly, demand clear mechanisms for loss and damage support, ensuring that climate vulnerable nations can cope with the irreversible impacts of climate change. And thirdly, of course, share stories of just transitions and climate justice, elevating solutions that prioritize workers, communities, and inclusive development. At the same time, civil society organizations play a very indispensable role in this process. Their involvement is crucial not just in advocacy, but also in shaping and sustainable real climate ambition. They can, of course, hold government accountable by independently monitoring progress on the NDC targets, bridge gaps between policy and people, ensuring that climate strategies are grounded in the realities of local communities and marginalized groups. Um, Also mobilize public support and political will for a more ambitious action and translate the global outcomes like the global stock date into national and local policy recommendations, making the Paris Agreement more meaningful at the grassroots level. So, in conclusion, the road to 1.5 degrees Celsius is still possible, but it only requires a very courageous political leadership and honest international cooperation, and of course, the full participation of of civil society and communities on the ground. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Z,
Thank
for
you, Rani.
for sharing your insight. I think um, in terms of, for example, Indonesian context, we relate a lot with what you have shared. For example, like
Mhm,
a lot of global South countries face socioeconomic vulnerability, and we are and in the time of contesting and also power struggles within, for example, you said the supply chain and trade routes. Global
mhm,
South are countries are like trying to grapple with this reality, and I think we can see and we can use COP30 as also one of the avenue to bring together, to shift and also to shape this narrative of transforming the economics and connect the climate line priorities with economic development, and one of it being, for example, under the just transition track that has been going for several years under Paris Agreement negotiation, for example. Thank you, Z, for the insight. And then we'll go to the last speaker who will talk about updates from Indonesia. So I will pass the floor to Bella.
Thank you, Shaharani. Good morning, good afternoon, esteemed panelists and participants. So today, ISEL would like to give a brief analysis on Indonesia's climate commitment heading toward COP30. Because this is like a reflections of 10 years of the Paris Agreement, I would love to track back a little bit to Indonesia's previous commitment along the years. So if we try to track back, the first NDC that was submitted by Indonesia is the intended NDC in 2015. So in Indonesia intended NDC in 2015, we have a target of 29% reductions of greenhouse gases unconditionally and 41% conditionally. Also, the same target we try to replicate in the first NDC that we submitted in 2016, also in the updated NDC in 2021. But we see an increase of target with a 31.8% reductions of greenhouse gases unconditionally and 43.2 conditionally. This was written in our enhanced NDC that was submitted in 2022. So we see an increased commitment by the Indonesian government throughout the years, although we feel like it is not a huge increase in a way. So the last circulated, but unfortunately, the draft that we have or the enhanced NDC that we have has included just transitioned to low carbon development, but it hasn't translated properly to both mitigation and adaptation actions, unfortunately. On the other hand, most people are currently in the dark, I can say, regarding the current process of submitting the new second NDC to the UNFCCC Secretariat. So before the government transitions in 2024, Indonesia already had a draft of a second NDC that are ready to be submitted to the Secretariat. But unfortunately, with the changing economic target and priority of the new government, the Indonesian second NDC is revisited again. And unfortunately, currently, like the civil society or the people in general don't really know where the process are right now. And one of the huge difference, aside from the process that is not, I can say, transparent enough, it will also need a consultation. So the draft need to be consulted and also need to be approved by the member of parliament, which is like different from the previous NDC. Next, please. So there are several room of improvements in the upcoming NDC. So the first one is on the energy sector. So we need a clear alignment with the global stocktake recommendations. So President Prabowo Subianto announced plans to retire all fossil fuel and coal-fired power plants within 15 years and achieve net zero before 2050. But and also we just hear a very good news today that the government officially will retire Cirebon 1 coal-fired power plant just today. However, like this effort that we have to increase energy transition effort also hamper by coal moratorium, by a lot of contradicting policies, I could say. For example, Indonesia is heavily dependent on subsidized coal and also monopolistic market. These situations make it really hard to have a real phase-out agenda from coal, especially. And also, we see the importance to including energy transition agenda in the NDC. Because right now, the policy landscape that we have several electricity planning in Indonesia. So when we have a clear energy transition agenda that we put in the NDC, hopefully, it could synchronize different energy transition target and agenda throughout the different planning that we have across the ministers. And also the secondly, regarding the forest and other land use, we also need to strengthen regulations across sectors that enable climate actions and align with climate goals. So currently, our policy that we have and regulations that enabling follow actions are really, really complicated, I could say. So there are a lot of regulations that are currently non-binding technical guidelines and also lack of integrations. So we need a more simple, I could say, and more aligned policies in our forest policy right now. Just to echo what colleague from Brazil already said before, so also regarding the data on deforestations, we need to improve transparency and data coordinations. So we need to unify the data on deforestation to enhance monitoring and law enforcement. Because according to the official data that we have right now, the deforestations in Indonesia are decreasing. But I'm just, really worried. We are just really worried. There are the real situations that we have on the ground. There are a lot of legal deforestations that use for energy and also food project, large scale. So that's why it needs to also reflect it in the data whether the deforestation is legal or illegal. And other than that, also we see the importance also to capture the improvement that was needed in the waste sector. So the first one, we also encourage to focus on organic waste emission reductions, as organic waste contributes to more than 50% of waste sector's emissions. And also the second one is to avoid waste to energy facility, since waste to energy facility is also reflected in the enhanced NDC that we have currently have. But unfortunately, according to the data and to the academic paper that was circulated, waste to energy facility emitted way more greenhouse gases compared to coal-fired power plant. So that's why we think that waste to energy facility is not like the real solutions for climate. Next, please. So just want to give like a brief explanations and reflections on how US exit would influence the climate negotiations in the future. So the first one, US withdrawal from the Paris Agreement may lower the confidence on climate multilateralisms and serve as a disincentive for Indonesia to pledge for higher ambitions. Aside from that, we also think that with US exiting from the Paris Agreement and other environmental multilateralism negotiations, not only Paris Agreement, but others also, we think that it leaves a huge gap financially and also, like in a way, in a lot of different fora, US was seen most of the time as one of the leading voices, like influential voices. And we see that it leaves a huge gap. That's why, just for an example, the Global Methane Pledge that was signed in 2020. One of the target and one of the proposal was encouraged by the EU and US. So when the Global Methane Pledge, so when the US tried to withdraw from the Paris Agreement, of course, it leaves a huge gap on the implementation of Global Methane Pledge. And also on the other side, we also entangled with the JETP process, and US is one of our funders on that process. That's why it will not influence in a lot of way, because there are still other countries that also contribute to JETP. However, the economic pressure, particularly from the tariff, might create reluctancy for higher climate ambitions. Nevertheless, finally, the recent tariff imposed by the US might create new multipolar climate lines beyond the US. So we see this as an opportunity in a way that could encourage South-to-South cooperations in the future COP. So on the other hand, we also see that these current situations that we have, it will also increase the possibility of energy transition. So to make it cheaper, so to make the focus switch to the South countries, when US, like most of the time they are the main market for energy transitions, but with the increasing tariff that we have right now, hopefully the focus would switch into the South countries. Next, please. So we also want to highlight the struggles between the energy and also forest contentions. So I tried to look on several news on Brazil and Indonesia cooperations regarding energy and forests. So interestingly, Indonesia sees the great potentials to increase the utilization of biodiesel. So they try to learn from Brazil. And they feel like this agenda is aligned with Indonesia's vision to create energy, food, and water resiliency. So when we try to look a little bit further into that, even the new development bank that was under BRICS, they also try to emphasize and also try to fund different projects that we have on biodiesel, for example, in the near future. And also when Indonesia tried to join the BRICS in just recently, 2024, late 2024 and early 2025, one of the main priority of the BRICS is to include bioenergy and biofuels as a priority commitment that could drive demand and market for biomass supply for Indonesia. But unfortunately, the use of biofuels and bioenergy it will hamper the energy transition, like the real energy transitions, because it will prolong our dependency toward the coal. For example, in 2023, if I'm not mistaken, we just have 23 coal-fired power plant that was planned as a coal-fired power plant, but it was increased in 2 years into 52 coal-fired power plant that are planned to be switched into co-firing. So a huge increase in this area, in this particular area, is also seen as a way from the government to prolong the use of coal-fired power plant by using the biomass. But on the other hand, we need also to underline that bioenergy project will also increase the pressure on forests, biodiversity protections, energy transition agenda, as I already said before, and also food resiliency agenda, because many of these, supposedly land used for food, for example, would use as an energy. Next, please. And finally, this is our suggested way forward to COP30. So the first one, we see that we need to foster a multi-actors coalition regarding just transitions. So on my reflections on Brazil, I think Brazil in many different fora, they are championing, they are really championed IPLC's rights, for example, forest issues, biodiversity. So hopefully Brazil presidency in COP30 could also align these many different interests into one main goal in COP30. And also try to include just transition in that agenda. Next one, we also think that ensuring GST1 implementation and mainstreaming in all UNFCCC work streams to enable higher ambitions are really important. And we need the Global South to also encourage that, and especially on the roadmap. The third one, Brazil's push for the tropical forest facility provides momentum for Indonesia to co-create tropical forest lines that emphasize not only protections, but also equitable benefit sharing for the FPLC. And also BRICS membership, we think that this will be a huge game changer in COP30. So we need BRICS not only, to speak about the economy, but we need BRICS to also championing climate justice, and also, encourage an equitable finance and also technology transfer. The fourth one, we also need to ensure participants of the Global Methane Pledge are on track to achieve the target. Since this was signed in 2022 and it will end in 2030, we think COP30 will mark as a, like halfway toward 2030. So we see like an evaluations of reducing the methane in reductions of 30% of methane could also seen as a good step during the COP. And finally, we see that showcasing proof of concept from civil society experience, stewardships, and works to raise confidence on climate futures are really important. I will stop in there and we'll try to give it back to Shahrani. Thank you.
Thank you, Bella, for your very detailed explanation on Indonesia. I think summarizing all of the updates that have been shared by the previous speakers as well, we see that the three countries that we take the cases on in this discussion are not yet aligned with the 1.5-degree pathways, and there are still a lot of room for improvements in the upcoming NDC, particularly in integrating the first global stocktake outcome, for example, into the upcoming NDC, or maybe later the updated one. And I think for Indonesia's case, the coordinated actions become inherently important, with the forest energy connections being very prominent in the upcoming years, especially in the current president's economic agenda. And lastly, the message was how COP30 can also become venue for emerging new political blocs that can provide opportunities and chances for stronger climate multilateralism in COP30 and beyond. Talking about the last topic, I think it connects to what Gio will be talking about. So Gio will wrap up the discussion by sharing about how the climate, how the current geopolitics can really impact the process in the negotiation, and what can we expect globally or internationally while trying to navigate this dynamics in the upcoming, specifically COP30. Please, Gio, the floor is yours.
Yeah, hello everyone. I hope you guys can hear me. Yeah. After three amazing panelists that really talks more about the specifics of each countries, and all of them are from Global South. No, even though I'm from German Watch, I won't be talking about Germany nor EU. I will be talking about more on global scale, kind of reminding why we are even talking about this. Hence my first point. Why do we do this? Why all the NDCs, why all the, how do you call this, targets and all the negotiations we are doing, is that because about 10 years ago, it was agreed that we are trying to stave off the global average temperature increase below 2 degrees, and if possible, below 1.5 or around 1.5. We know for a fact, or at least through scientific data, that we cannot reach that 1.5 target anymore. But Paris Agreement have its own positive and negative sides that I will talk about through my presentation. This is more so that we remind ourselves why we are doing all this. One of the positive sides of Paris Agreement was this. This is probably some of you are already familiar with this graph taken by from Climate Action Tracker. And we can see that one of the positive side kind of from Paris Agreement is that since it was agreed and people realize, oh yes, we are emitting too much CO2, the increase in CO2 hasn't been as fast anymore as before, which is, well, of course, we can say, yeah, it's not enough, but before people haven't even think about the concept of reducing our emission to keep our climate change under control, right? And since then, there has been a lot of development. I mean, just name of some stuff, like news, like Germany with that already had more than 50% of renewable energy in their power grids. UK had a moment where they use electricity without fossil fuel at all, although of course nuclear is involved. And specific politics, specific actions that really want to try to adapt and reduce the climate change was done, even though it is probably not enough yet. And German Watch, oh, sorry, not yet. And this is also a bit of an overview. These graph and this map and dot also illustrate a bit how much we have actually done. Oh, hello. Yeah, how
Yes,
much we
you're
have actually
audible.
done on political side of things. Yeah. So this graph illustrates 1,950 submissions from all parties or countries around the world since we uh, starting negotiating about climate change. It includes all the technical documents, NDCs, and so on and so forth. But it's actually a sign that countries are actually working together. How they are working together, of course, not yet enough. In German Watch's Climate Change Performance Index, we try to track 60-ish countries that are responsible for 90% of global emission. Hence, why you can see, for example, almost all of countries in Africa is not represented here, is because, well, they just don't emit that much. And the fact is that the G20 still is the world's largest emitter, and none of these tracked countries reach the top three. So the fourth country that received the highest ranking was Denmark. And just as an example, where I come from, Indonesia is ranked 42nd, dropped down to sixth places last. Combination of greenhouse gases emission, energy use, policy progress, and so on. And yeah, that is a bit of introduction, I guess, to let's say about the next topic that we want to talk about, right? What is the connection between all this and what we call as climate multilateralism? Is like what I already said, we are already kind of working together towards a common climate goal, if you can say it as a goal, although we know that Paris Agreement doesn't even prescribe a pathway to us. They require every country to have their own pathway, if you will. These are taken, the stuff that are talked about by UNFCCC are already taken to many processes and other organizations, which even we call, processes like ASEAN, for example, starts to take negotiation items from UNFCCC for themselves so that they can start to think about climate change. And we know that why we have to work together, because climate crisis is simply multidimensional. Previous presentation already described how climate change, for example, touches upon biodiversity, for example. There is topics that are untouched. We never touched climate migration, health, and so on. So it's not only about mitigation and adaptation. And then after that comes a problem that even if we reaches net zero, the emission that we already emit historically will still already be there. right? And on the other side of things, a lot of countries, especially from global south, of course, still wants to develop. And this creates a dynamic that probably people didn't realize going into the negotiation rooms, that they create this kind of uh, groups among their own negotiations that doesn't seems to stretch forever. And because at least UNFCCC try to have these principles that countries will do based on their own capacities. And of course, about the shared responsibility that we have on climate change. Hopefully, uh, it will involve non-state actors. I will go a bit more into that in the presentation. But yeah, the problem here is that we are trying to work together as countries. Problem is, not a lot of countries actually have a climate foreign policy strategy at all. There are only probably 7, 8 countries now in the world, 7 because US went out, that actually have targeted climate policy strategy that we can even evaluate. Germany, some Nordic countries, as an example. And then when we talk about this foreign policy, for climate foreign policy, usually it is a dichotomy between the global south countries asking for money and global north having development aid. It's sad that this kind of thing is lost in technical discussion. Science, IPCC is already in its 6th, 7th iteration, but there's just no political will to do anything. Already touched upon US exiting, other multi-crisis, Ukraine war, and so on, means that we know what we are actually having in the world, but there are too many actors that want to do everything. Yeah. So my answer is that how to deal with this is actually with, well, uh, working together from civil society. Because even in less democratic countries, we can see what happened in Serbia, for example, right now, where just because the people really want a change, now the political pendulum fighting against well, a dictator basically, um, is so strong that the dictator there just cannot do anything, at least right now. And this is the critical role of civil society. And it doesn't mean that every country have to have the same form of civil society discussion. Probably I will skip this because we have already talked about this in other presentations. But yeah, what can we do actually together? Mm, as civil society, we need to define a goal together. It it is better that it is reachable, scientific data, but and not only based on ideologies. It has to focus on our national level capacity, or if not, then borrow it from the COP that year's COP's agenda. We have to work together. We have to have common front with proper principles behind us, because if then we will keep talking about the same things and debate the same things without progressing forward. And we have to not forget that climate change is an intergenerational problem. We have to compromise over polarizing views that we have often in our even own civil society discussion. And probably the last, we have to remind ourselves that UNFCCC negotiations, or what we call as COP now, are not only done in the negotiation rooms. We have to approach our party contacts. We have to approach our civil society contacts as early as possible. I would even say now, probably a bit too late. SBs is in 1 or 2 months. And I know that in a lot of our countries, we have a lot change in government recently. We need to have active bilateral approach between us and the actors we want to approach. And if we have funding, go there. Because it is better to go to these bilateral discussions as early as possible. And we have to share intel among us like we are doing right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Gio, especially for the last sentence. The intel sharing is very important among civil society organizations, particularly for coalition building. So Gio has emphasized first and foremost, climate crisis is a multidimensional problem, and there's no one fits all solutions to one problem that the scale of climate crisis has upon all of us. And then I think it's very important point in the last part where I think civil society plays a critical role in keeping the confidence and spirit of Paris Agreement alive even beyond COP30 with the current dynamics, geopolitical dynamics, and the multi-scale consolidations, collaborations among civil society organizations is very important in building and strengthening this demand for stronger commitments ahead of COP30. I think it wraps up the session from the presentation from our panelists, and now we will have a discussion with the participants. So we already have like 5 questions, 4 actually, 4 questions that have not been answered, and then 2 answered questions. But Mariana, if you want to emphasize your answer live, it's also okay. So the first is okay. So the first is, I think this is an interesting question that can be also answered with by other speakers. So question from Tori is that since Brazil is the host of COP30, how will Brazil and CSO gather CSOs from around the world, and are there any plans to build specific coalitions to do this? So Mariana, maybe you can reiterate your answer live, but I also want to hear answers from other speakers as fellow civil society organizations on what do you think can be tapped and integrated into the coalition building in the way to the upcoming COP30. So maybe Mariana, you would like to start first.
Of course, thank you, Rani. This is a very interesting question. I started answering it on the chat. But one of the points that I highlighted in the answer is that I think that one of the most interesting things that the CSOs can do at the moment is to find common grounds. So for example, we can deepen the conversation regarding deforestation with tropical forest country CSOs, for example. So if we find common ground, we can sort of to start the debate and to intensify the conversation between different CSOs. What we have had difficulty doing at the moment is to find a more common ground, not common ground, that's not the good word, but to intensify the discussion regarding the transitioning away from fossil fuels. Because this one is one of the issues that we do not see, as I said in my presentation, any of the countries sort of advocating for this. So, because for example, deforestation, we see that the Brazilian government has already spoken on ending deforestation by 2030. This is something that they plan on doing. But for example, the transitioning away from fossil fuels is not in the Brazilian NDC. So how do you start a debate around this topic specifically? So this is an issue that I'm interested also in hearing the other answers on how we can intensify these debates. Because if we don't have a country championing for it, it's harder to push the country for doing it, which is not the case for deforestation, for example. But yeah, so that's why I think it's important for us, NGOs, CSOs, to sort of do more regular debates, to sort of have stronger conversations, so that one, we can find common points, and two, what can we do about the common points that we have? How can we act upon them? How can we do advocacy regarding these points? So I think I'm interested also in hearing the other panelists' view on this.
Thank you, Mariana. Who wants to go first? Maybe from Bella, Z, or Gio to add on what Mariana has said. Okay, maybe Bella, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge in international fora, all across international fora, is to find convergence within the CSOs. That's why I feel like the most important part heading toward COP30 is to find convergence between these different issues. That's the main point. So we try to see what is the convergence between, like, for example, like forest issues, IPLC's issues, energy issues, and also just transition issues and biodiversity issues, and try to find the convergence in all of those different issues. Because I feel with the weakening power of the countries toward COP30, as Mariana already mentioned before, EU is fragmented, US is withdrawn from the Paris Agreement. I feel like this is the huge gap that need to be filled by the CSOs. So one is convergence of issues, and second, with the convergence of issues, we can create an alternative power leading toward COP30. That's my 2 points.
Yeah, thank you. Z, do you want to jump in?
I think, yeah, I've also already, some of the answers are already answered. I can move on to the other questions later on, especially on climate change.
Okay, thank you. Bang Gio. Gio, do you want to add on the question? So basically, the question is, we want to know from other panelists' perspective on what kind. Oh, I think Gio is having a technical
Yeah, well,
problem. Wait. Okay, yeah. Unfortunately, Gio is having a technical and connection problem, so maybe we can go back to him once he's back. Okay, for next question, the questions are still going on in the Q&A, so the speakers feel free to type in your answers. And I see that there's a question that Mariana wants to answer live from Yobel. So do you see any hope of Brazil fulfilling its environmental leadership goal under a government that has previously built Belo Monte with the current forces that dominate Congress and current geopolitical dynamics? How can Brazilian civil society press the government in an effective and meaningful way?
This is a very interesting question, and I thought I wanted to answer it live because it would be a very long chat. So just to quickly answer it live. Although this government is responsible for Belo Monte, and although we have seen some contradictory things, this government is also very, very open to listening to civil society. So this is a very important shift compared to, for example, to the previous government, the Bolsonaro government, where we had absolutely no type of communication with them at the government. This one is keen on listening to us. They are open to having meetings with us. So this is a huge difference. So although they are responsible for Belo Monte, although there are these contradictory statements, the Brazilian government is also, they want to listen. We, for example, did a civil society NDC that we call it. So we collectively did what we think would be the best NDC for Brazil in the Climate Observatory. And we presented it to the government. The government listened, and so we have this discussion with them. This is a very important point. But also in the places where we do not have this discussion, for example, on Congress, we are striving and working very hard collectively between the organizations to not let advance these possible destructive bills in the Congress. So we are always launching statements. We are very present at the Congress. So what we do is that we work on different levels. So at the executive branch, we have discussions with the government. In the legislative branch, we are trying to stop these bills from advancing. And we also work on climate litigation in the judiciary branch. So it's sort of working in different spheres so that we can sort of help Brazilian NDC and help the commitments to be to stand their ground. So I think that is sort of a very summed up way of answering the question. But thank you for the question. Very interesting.
Yeah. Thank you, Mariana. I think there's also one interesting questions from Tori. I would like to direct this question to Z. So as I observe, all the discussion about NDC mostly is all about emission reduction. However, as the temperature goes rising, climate change impact is inevitable. How would you put adaptation at COP30? And what kind of potential common ground and agenda civil society can push for adaptation in the upcoming COP30? Maybe Z would like to answer this question.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's very important, like as I mentioned earlier, particularly for adaptation. We mentioned that loss and damage fund is also one of the key priorities that we need to prioritize in terms of like climate finance. Because especially for climate vulnerable countries, we don't have very direct access to adaptation solutions. We don't have like a safety net in a sense. So like say for example, in the case of ICSC, we are also a member of the GCF CSO network, wherein um, we try to be like sort of like a watchdog of like what are the climate processes in the Green Climate Fund, how are proposals being made, whether they are climate adaptive, or whether it prioritizes the balance of mitigation and adaptation aspects of certain proposals, whether it prioritizes climate vulnerable countries, especially SIDS. So um, yeah, so I think like that's also the key aspect, like when you try to put it in the lens of like leading up, like the Green Climate Fund leading up to the COP, those are the key things that you need to look at um in terms of adaptation.
Yeah. Thank you, Z. I would like to direct another interesting questions. I think I will just merge these two questions about forest to Bella, and if Mariana wants to answer as well, since one of the question also relates to Brazil, feel free to jump in. So the question is, with the various latest Indonesian government policies, and also the political elements and issues rising in relation to the forest and land use net in 2030. Do you think that Indonesia will achieve its NDC target in the forest and land use sector? And how likely is it for Indonesia to team up with Brazil in COP30 for ending deforestation, considering that the Indonesian government has been pushing for policies that put pressure on forests?
Yeah, I'll try to answer first. So, regarding the questions, I think the current state that we have, the current visions that the government have with the 8% economic development target and also food and energy resiliency projects, it will create huge pressures on deforestations of natural forests, especially, and also opening of a lot of pits for these projects particularly. That's why, as I mentioned before, in my presentations, transparency is the cornerstone, is the key toward these issues. Because again, if we know exactly whether there are deforestation, whether it is legal or illegal, it will a lot of easier for us to count on whether we can achieve the target that we have in our NDC or not. So I feel like integration of data and also transparency of data that could be accessed by the public is very important. But unfortunately, right now, the transparency issue is still like on the top of our list as the main problem because there are a lot of different data that was published by different organizations, by the government. It always shows like different numbers. And regarding the collaborations between the Brazilian and also Indonesian government, I think in a way it is realistic because right now they are currently in the same space with the BRICS, but in a way, geopolitically speaking, they are also a rival, in this space because they need to access on the same financial arrangement within the climate fund. So Brazil also access the finance to halt the deforestations, and also Indonesia try to access the finance for halt the deforestations. So we have a very, I could say, a very small portion right now of finance, and we need to compete to access that financial sources. That's why I feel like this is more like a more complicated problems that we have. It is not like a straightforward that we can cooperate with Brazil, but there are a lot of other issues that we need to consider within this space.
Yeah. Marina, do you want to add to what Bella has said? No.
No, I think that Bella summed it up perfectly. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, I think I will pitch the next question to Gio. There's a question on, will there be any strong leadership, especially from Global South, as there is leadership vacuum from the US and EU, which is currently fragmented and due to a lot of political dynamics, I would say. Do you have anything to share on this question, Gio, if you are
Yeah.
still with us?
Yeah, I will. I'm
Okay.
fine. You can hear
Thank
me?
you.
Okay. Okay. So, well, short answer, BRICS. Long answer, is that how do you define this leadership? Because I have the perception that actually on the UNFCCC floors, Global South has always been the leader. Global North, honestly, has been there just because, well, they have the funding. Philippines have been championing adaptation since as far as I can remember. Brazil and other, how do you call this, Latin American countries have been very active. The last speech on from Bolivia on just transition in Baku was so moving. And we can see that, I mean, on leadership side, on the content, on the willingness to do things, we are already a leader. The problem is that there, let's say like this, the one that has money cannot be moved. And this is what we, yeah, need to work on. Thank you.
Thank you, Gio. We still have around 10 minutes left. We still have questions, but I would like to direct the recent questions. It also connects to what Gio has just answered. Gio answered that BRICS might come out as a potential leaders on climate. or environmental in general in the leadership vacuum that we currently facing. As Indonesia joined BRIC, it is believed that there will be an increase in the economy, which then puts pressure on the environment. Will the existing environmental laws be able to prevent such pressure? And what legal products are needed, and what are the plans of CSO NGO for this? This is actually a question specific on Indonesia, so I would like to direct Bella to answer this. But if Gio wants to add on explaining about perhaps how the BRICS agenda might also threaten the the environmental commitments or like environmental protection agenda already in place in some countries, feel free to do so. So Bella, you may answer the question.
Yeah, regarding the legal products that we need, particularly in Indonesia, so I've mentioned before in my presentations. So the first one is we need an integrate policy on climate. That's the first one, because right now we have like different policies all across sectors that try to regulate on climate. For example, like on energy transition, as I mentioned before. So we have different plannings on electricity, and also regarding like on waste sector, for example, we have different target on the strategic planning, midterm strategic planning, and we have a different target on the presidential regulations on waste. So that's why we need to have an integrate effort. We need to have an integrate policies. That's why it is important that currently the member of parliament are also prioritizing the climate justice bill to be discussed in the near future. I feel like it will be a huge game changer because when we have a more integrated policies in the future that try to point out into one target, for example, in NDC. So we have a lot of different tools that we can use to achieve the NDC. That's why I feel like the climate justice bill will be a huge game changer. And the second one, I think, aside from the climate justice bill, the current plan to revise the forestry law, the Forestry Act, will also, influence a lot the achievement that we have in the NDC. So if the revisions of the Forest Act that we have right now is leading toward, enabling the forest opening into food and energy projects, well, unfortunately, I'm afraid that it will not align with our NDC target. But if the Forest Act that we are currently now trying to revise will lead into a more synchronized permit, for example, or more synchronized rights toward the IPLCs, well, I feel like it will be a huge game changer to achieve the NDCs that we have, because with a more integrated policies on the forest law, it will also really help to halt the deforestations that we have right now in Indonesia. So I feel like there are two strategic policies. The first one is the climate justice bill, and the second one is the Forest Act that currently under revisions.
Thank you, Bella. Well, in Indonesia, there are currently a lot of momentums for regulation reform. If we manage to push a great deal on the revision, there might be quite a lot of shifted conditions towards a more positive commitment and engagement in this issue. I would like to confirm and ask
Yeah.
whether Gio want to add on that
Well,
question.
I will try. Again, yeah. One point that may be connected to this is that there is a lot of discussions right now saying that, oh, COP is not more important. COP is outdated, and so on. But the problem is there is just no other alternative. BRICS, though, is probably an answer, but we have to not to forget BRICS is an economic partnership, not climate partnership. Climate just happens to be in the agenda because, well, these countries feel threatened that uh, their development, their economic development will be hindered because of climate change, right? So trying to answer this how it can how what is the policy product that we have and how to make it probably is that hopefully COP still can make decisions that we can trickle down into policy products in each countries while we are implementing NDCs. I mean, it's not new. Indonesia, Germany, both have kind of laws that actually refers to Paris Agreement directly as a goal why we are reducing emission. Just as an example, you see that how it can affect real national law policy products. So yeah, um, yes, we need to search for alternative routes, but we cannot let COP to die. Let's say like that. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Gio. I think this will be our last questions before we wrap up the session with closing statement from the panelists. This is a very intriguing questions, I would say, from Muhammad Fadil Harissa, and I would like to direct this question to Z. So small islands nations have contributed the least to global emissions, but are among the most affected by sea level rise. Despite the promises of climate finance and support, I think there is still a huge gap that needs to be filled. Has the Paris Agreement delivered on climate justice and equity for vulnerable nations such as small island nations? And what can be done to better address this imbalance?
Hello. Yeah. So yeah, I was actually already typing my answer to Mohammed, but yes. So I agree very much that the Paris Agreement has not yet fully delivered what a climate justice or what an equity looks like for the special needs of climate vulnerable nations and countries. So a main example of this is that the promise of mobilizing the 100 billion USD annually by 2020, which has not yet been fully realized. And much of the finance provided has come off as loans rather than grants, which comes off as like a debt burden of vulnerable nations. So some of the ways that we can explore some of these imbalances, as of course, as I mentioned, is operationalize and scale up LND or a loss and damage finance, ensuring that loss and damage fund becomes predictable, accessible, and grant-based, prioritizing the needs of the most vulnerable. Um, and of course, holding high emitting countries accountable. I think it's already been the forefront of many climate justice movements. Um, by holding them accountable to strengthen the mechanisms and tracking and reviewing NDCs, and of course, pushing for science-based targets aligned with the 1.5 degrees Celsius. Um, and of course, lastly, it's very important that we elevate the voices of the vulnerable nations. I think like what we do right now specifically is an example of how we try to um, put up like the samples of countries, what are the context of the countries and their NDCs, what are the gaps, and what are the things that we can improve. This becomes sort of as a sample, sort of like a similarity profile that can help us ensure that you know we elevate the voices of vulnerable nations. So yeah, I hope I was able to answer that question.
Thank you, Z. I think that will be the last questions for today's discussion. Before we wrap up, I would like to kind of like reiterate some points of our discussions today before going to the closing statement of each of the speakers. I think the highlight of the discussion was that in the 10th years of Paris Agreement, we still have a huge load of homework that needs to be done. And in this process, particularly for filling the gap and addressing climate justice, civil society actually plays a very critical role in also assisting the progress to actually achieve the desired objectives of Paris Agreement, and as well as realizing the climate justice for especially the impacted and most vulnerable groups. And then I think it is timely than ever to start building multi-scale collaborations among civil society organizations, where a lot of ways, channels, and efforts have been conducted and done on the ground by a lot of civil society organizations around the world. And I think COP30 might be the right moment to become like a culmination of all of these efforts. And timely with also the 1 decade of Paris Agreement. And the question remains on is climate negotiation and the way to implement Paris Agreement is the only way that we have to actually achieve climate justice and to really tackle the climate crisis reality that we are facing? Or will there be another solution, another way, and another pathway that might emerge or might be built on in the upcoming years, or maybe near future? I think this question remains deliberated among us, and I think it will be great to have another discussion on this specifically. So before closing up the discussion, I would like to invite all of the speakers to give a closing statement on your thoughts on today's discussion, and perhaps what can be expected or what should be done by us civil society organizations, or maybe other elements in order to push for a stronger climate commitment in the evolving geopolitical agenda. So maybe I would like to reverse the order. So maybe Gio can go first, and then Mariana will go last.
Okay. Maybe closing statement message probably to every one of us. I saw a lot of the participants are also kind of working in this kind of field anyway. And I cannot state this anymore, that we need to stay positive. I know it looks always difficult. It's like unmovable, how do you call this? It seems unmovable target. It seems to be unreachable. But as we can see, actually 10 years of Paris Agreement has resulted in something. Not optimal, but something. So yeah, we have to keep cooperating together, keep working as a unit. Thank you.
Thank you, Gio. So Bella?
So I will have 2 points. So the first points, I think just transitions needs to be included in the negotiations during COP30, because it will connect with the main issues that the presidency tried to bring, for example, like the deforestations, and also finance as a continuations of from the previous COP. And the second one, I think civil society needs a space during the negotiations, because I feel like there are a lot of shrinking civic space during the international negotiations. So I feel like, and also that's why I feel like civil society leading toward COP30, and also during the COP30, they need a space during the negotiations. And also, aside from the space, the civil society also need like a more integrated message leading toward COP30, and also to bring an idea that will disrupt the negotiations, because there are a vacuum of power from the current countries during COP30. Thank you.
Thank you, Bella. Z?
Of course. So yeah, first I would like to thank Isel for inviting me today. It was of course an honor for me to speak and talk about the context of the Philippine climate action. And of course, the audience, thank you for being with us today. So I think as we close, we're reminded also of like the critical role that the civil society plays, not just as advocates, but also like the architects of change. It might be seem like very cliche, but like our voices, our work, and the stories that we have are very essential in pushing for climate justice and holding systems accountable and shaping, of course, inclusive and ambitious pathways forward. So I think today is also an example, or let us make today be more than just a conversation. It's also a call for us to continue collaborating, speaking the experiences we have into power and to movements and building the future that we, of course, we deserve. So, of course, as already mentioned by the previous speakers, yeah, the road is very long ahead, but I think together we need to keep the momentum going, and the work doesn't really end here, and it begins anew with every action that we take. So yeah.
Thank you, Z. And last but not least, Mariana, our first speaker.
Thank you. Thank you very much for organizing this very important debate. Thank you to the speakers. Thank you to everybody that participated very actively with all the questions. I think that I would make 4 points. First off is the leadership vacuum will give more space to the global south, so we will have more voice. 2, this will be a civil society focused COP, so we will have more space for discussion. So this is a very interesting point, especially for us. 3, I think that we saw that we have common points between us CSOs, despite being from different countries. So I think that that was very interesting. So I think that we should, in fact, increase these types of conversations. These types of conversations are very important. And last off, I will also like to make a point that Bella put up, that I think that just transition should have a big space. So we should talk about transitioning away from fossil fuels. And I think that that is a point that we as civil society can make very emphatically. So I think that's it. And thank you very much once again.
Yeah, thank you very much to all the speakers and also the attendants for today's webinar. This Mariana closing statement wraps up all of our discussions today. And as Z has mentioned, we hope that this conversation today is not going to be just another conversation we have about COP, but this will also escalate into something that is more solid and lead to stronger collaboration among civil society organizations leading to the COP30 in November. Okay, so I would like to thank all of the panelists and also participants for joining the webinar today. As for the participant, I would like to invite you to fill on the form that has been shared in the chat in order to access the panelist materials. Once you filled in the form, you can find a link to the materials that the panelists have shared today. And if you have any questions, you can also send it to ISEL's email, and perhaps we might also pass it to the panelists if they want to answer your questions. So with that, I would like to conclude the session. And once again, thank you for all of your active participation, and hope to see you in the next conversation, and also perhaps, I don't know what, I don't know if it's the right word, consolidations with other civil society organizations. Thank you, everyone, and
you,
have
everyone.
a nice
Thank you.
afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.